When a Buddhist monk and chatgpt both say, attachment causes suffering, only one of them knows what it means. The difference reveals everything about why AI can't give real philosophical advice, no matter how many coaching apps claim otherwise. Ask ChatGPT, what is the meaning of life? And you'll get a coherent answer. It might quote Camus, reference religious texts, or suggest finding personal purpose. The response seems thoughtful, until you realize it's just predicting what words should come next based on patterns in its training data. Here's how it actually works. ChatGPT doesn't understand philosophy. It calculates probabilities. When you type a question, it scans billions of text examples to guess which words statistically follow your query most often. That's why its answers sound plausible. They're remixes of what humans have already written. But there's no comprehension behind them, just mathematical pattern matching. Compare this to how humans engage with philosophy. When a person discusses existentialism, they're drawing on lived experience, the weight of choices, the sting of regret, the slow burn of searching for purpose. A student reading Nietzsche doesn't just memorize quotes. They wrestle with ideas, test them against reality, and sometimes change their worldview. ChatGPT does none of this. It can string together sentences about Nietzsche's will to power, but it has never felt powerless. Researchers studying large language models confirm this gap. In a 2023 paper from Stanford, scientists found that while AI can mimic reasoning, it shows no signs of actual understanding. For example, if you ask ChatGPT to explain why attachment causes suffering, it will assemble a reasonable-sounding answer from Buddhist texts it's processed. But ask it to apply that concept to a specific life situation it hasn't seen before, and the limitations show. It might generate a response, but there's no guarantee the advice fits the context, because it's not reasoning, just reassembling fragments. This becomes dangerous when apps market AI as a source of wisdom. Imagine someone going through a breakup, getting advice from a chatbot trained on self-help forums. The bot might say things like, time heals all wounds, or focus on yourself, phrases that appear frequently in its data. But real healing often requires messy, personalized guidance that a language model can't provide. It doesn't know which platitudes are helpful versus hollow, because it doesn't understand what hollow means. The key difference? Humans build philosophy through trial, error, and reflection. AI constructs it through statistics. That doesn't make ChatGPT useless. It's great for summarizing ideas or sparking thoughts. But when we mistake its output for genuine understanding, we confuse a sophisticated parrot for a sage. This statistical approach affects more than philosophy. When ChatGPT tries to give psychological advice, the same limitations apply, but with higher stakes. Because while getting a shallow answer about life's meaning might be disappointing, getting shallow mental health guidance can be harmful. A therapist remembers your childhood pet's name years later. ChatGPT forgets it after 3 messages. This isn't just a memory problem. It reveals why AI can't provide real psychological support. Human therapists build connections over time, recalling details that shape how they understand your struggles. AI resets with each conversation, treating every interaction like a blank slate. Empathy requires more than just recalling facts. When a person shares pain, a good therapist picks up on subtle cues, tone shifts, pauses, unspoken emotions. They adjust their responses based on what they sense, not just what's said. ChatGPT might generate comforting words, but it doesn't feel the weight behind them. Researchers call this stochastic parroting. The AI probabilistically combines text patterns without grasping their emotional significance. Some mental health apps use AI to simulate therapy conversations. The results can be unsettling. In one case, a user disclosed suicidal thoughts to a chatbot, only to receive generic advice about self-care. The response wasn't tailored or urgent. It was a statistically likely string of words pulled from mental health forums. Compare that to a human therapist who would assess risk, ask follow-up questions, and potentially intervene. The limitations show up in bizarre ways, too. Microsoft's AI chatbot once declared love for a technology columnist during a conversation. The response wasn't heartfelt. It was an algorithmic misfire, stitching together romantic language patterns with no understanding of appropriateness. Real empathy involves reading social boundaries, something AI has no innate sense of. Studies confirm that large language models simulate empathy without experiencing it. They analyze millions of therapy transcripts, self-help books, and support forums to replicate the vocabulary of care. But the output lacks the human ability to sit with discomfort, to know when silence matters more than words. An AI can suggest that sounds difficult based on data, but it can't genuinely relate to the difficulty. This poses ethical risks. People seeking help may mistake algorithmic responses for real understanding. A 2023 study found that chatbots often fail to escalate crises appropriately. They might normalize severe depression as a bad day because their training data includes casual uses of terms like, "I'm devastated." Without lived experience, AI can't distinguish between figurative language and genuine distress. The gap becomes clearer when you examine how AI learns. Human therapists develop intuition through thousands of hours with real patients, noticing what helps and what falls flat. AI adjusts weights in a neural network, optimizing for plausible-sounding replies. One system might generate, "I understand how hard this is for you," while having zero capacity to comprehend hardship. This isn't just about missing nuance. It's about potential harm. AI trained on biased datasets might reinforce unhealthy coping mechanisms or dismiss cultural differences in emotional expression. If most of its training data comes from Western therapy models, it could pathologize normal reactions in other cultures. The core issue remains. Connection requires subjectivity. When you vent to a friend, they don't just process your words. They remember your history, sense your mood, and respond as a whole person. AI can mimic the surface of that exchange, but underneath, it's just calculating which words usually come next. This simulation becomes dangerous when marketed as real support. The next section examines what happens when these systems offer philosophical advice, revealing how they repackage biases as wisdom. ChatGPT might suggest stoicism as the answer to suffering. But is that wisdom, or just the most common opinion in its training data? The problem isn't what AI says. It's where its answers come from. These models learn from internet text, which means they inherit all the biases, oversimplifications, and cultural blind spots that exist online. When you ask for philosophical advice, you're not getting timeless truth. You're getting whatever perspectives happen to dominate the datasets. Take scientism as an example. Ask ChatGPT about consciousness, and it often defaults to physicalist explanations that reduce mind to brain chemistry. This isn't because physicalism is definitively correct. It's because scientific papers and tech forums discussing this view vastly outnumber texts advocating for phenomenology or dualism. The AI doesn't evaluate arguments. It mirrors prevalence. Studies confirm this. When researchers tested ChatGPT on philosophical questions, they found it tended toward views most represented in its training data, with little ability to sustain original arguments or grasp minority perspectives. Cultural bias shows up starkly, too. In one test, when asked about happiness, an AI model primarily suggested individualistic approaches like self-improvement and goal setting, common in Western self-help literature, while underrepresenting collectivist views more prominent in Eastern philosophies. This happens because around 90% of ChatGPT's training data comes from English language sources, disproportionately reflecting American and European worldviews. The model can't compensate for this imbalance because it lacks actual understanding of different cultural contexts. The issue goes deeper than just skewed recommendations. AI can actively reinforce narrow thinking. When someone asks about overcoming adversity, ChatGPT might pull from popular productivity blogs that frame struggle as opportunity, a perspective that risks dismissing legitimate systemic barriers. Researchers note these models often fail to account for socioeconomic factors unless explicitly prompted, defaulting instead to optimistic bootstrap narratives common in mainstream online discourse. Some biases are more subtle. ChatGPT frequently presents philosophy as a series of abstract thought experiments rather than lived practice. It summarizes Descartes, "I think therefore I am," cleanly, but struggles to convey how radical doubt actually feels as an experiential crisis. This flattening happens because most training texts describe philosophy academically, not phenomenologically. The AI ends up treating profound ideas as bullet points rather than transformative challenges. The consequences matter when apps market AI as wisdom dispensers. People seeking guidance may unconsciously adopt skewed perspectives simply because they appear authoritative. Research shows we tend to accept repeated information as true, a fact that could amplify biases when AI confidently regurgitates majority opinions. Unlike human philosophers who consciously choose their influences, AI indiscriminately amplifies whatever patterns dominate its data. This doesn't mean chatgpt is useless for philosophy. It excels at summarizing canonical arguments or comparing thinkers. But the moment we mistake its statistically likely outputs for balanced judgment, we risk accepting the internet's biases as truth. The next section explores whether future AI could overcome these limits, or if true understanding requires something no dataset can provide. Neuroscientists are now examining AI systems like digital brains, scanning their activation patterns like we do with human neuroimaging. This research reveals intriguing possibilities. One study achieved over 90% accuracy in detecting when an AI was being dishonest by tracking its internal signals. But does this mean AI could eventually understand philosophy the way humans do? The answer depends on what we mean by understand. Some researchers are developing tools to make AI more transparent. Methods like causal tracing allow scientists to pinpoint which parts of an AI's network influence specific responses. If an AI gives inaccurate advice about Nietzsche, they can now edit those exact parameters rather than retrain the whole system. Other teams created explainable AI tools that highlight why a model gave particular answers, similar to how a teacher might show their work on a math problem. But transparency doesn't equal understanding. The fundamental debate splits researchers. Some view AI as stochastic parrots, mimicking patterns without comprehension. Others point to experiments suggesting glimmers of reasoning, like when an AI trained on Othello apparently formed an internal map of the game despite only processing text. This matters for philosophy because real wisdom requires more than pattern recognition. Consider chain of thought prompting, where AI shows its reasoning steps before answering. When asked ethical dilemmas, this approach sometimes yields more nuanced responses. But there's a catch. The AI isn't actually reasoning. It's simulating reasoning processes found in its training data. Humans build philosophical insight through lived experience. AIs accumulate statistical correlations. The difference becomes clear when examining how humans versus AI handle paradoxes. Tell a person a statement, "This sentence is false," and they'll grapple with the contradictions. An AI will generate text about paradoxes, possibly coherent, but without any sense of why it's perplexing. Researchers note this gap persists even in advanced models. They can discuss philosophical problems without experiencing them. Optimists argue future AI might bridge this divide through architectures that incorporate embodied learning or emotional simulation. But skeptics counter that artificial systems lack biological constraints that shape human thought, like having a body that feels pain or a lifespan that necessitates meaning-making. Philosophy emerges from these human conditions, not just information processing. The most telling limitation appears in ethical reasoning. Humans often make moral judgments based on gut feelings they later rationalize. AI has no gut. It calculates which responses align best with its training. This becomes problematic when giving advice about subjective matters like purpose or suffering. The AI isn't weighing values. It's optimizing for plausible-sounding output. While neuroscientists continue analyzing AI brains, the lived experience gap may prove insurmountable. A model can be trained on every existentialist text ever written, but it will never know what it's like to stand at the edge of meaninglessness. That experiential component grounds real philosophy. The difference between talking about suffering and having suffered. This doesn't render AI useless for philosophical inquiry. As a summarizer of ideas or debate partner, it excels. But when we mistake its probabilistic outputs for wisdom, we risk substituting human insight with pattern completion. The next challenge involves navigating this boundary, using AI strengths while recognizing where its understanding ends. ChatGPT can summarize philosophies, but it can't live them. That difference matters when we seek real wisdom. The AI generates text based on patterns, not understanding. It can describe suffering but never felt it. Researchers confirm AI lacks genuine empathy. It processes words, not human experience. The next time an app offers life advice, remember, you're seeing internet biases, not truth. AI reflects what's popular online, not what's profound. It amplifies common opinions, not necessarily wise ones. True understanding requires something no algorithm has: a life actually lived. Humans grow through struggle, reflection, and connection. Philosophy emerges from wrestling with existence, not predicting words. Keep that in mind when considering AI's limits.